All right, so let's get right into it. We're going to talk about Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, but probably not in the way you remember from English class. Forget seeing it as just some dusty old classic. No, we're going to treat it like what it really is: a dangerous idea, a psychological experiment gone horribly wrong. The entire book really boils down to this one single, chilling question. What if you could come up with the perfect, logical, airtight reason to murder someone? Not out of passion, but out of pure reason. Could you actually go through with it? And maybe the bigger question is, what happens after? Could you live with yourself? Well, a 19th century student in St. Petersburg decided to find out. His name is Rodion Raskolnikov. He's broke, he's brilliant, and he's completely obsessed with this question. So he decides, you know what? I'm gonna test this theory. And that's what this is really all about. It's not just a crime story. It's the story of how an idea can become a parasite, how it can burrow into a person's mind and just completely destroy them from the inside. So, what was this big, dangerous idea? I mean, what kind of theory could possibly justify murder? Well, Raskolnikov had one all worked out, a whole philosophy ready to go long before the crime itself. He called it his Superman theory. At its core, the theory, which he actually got published in an article, by the way, is this: humanity is split into two groups. Now, this didn't just pop into his head out of nowhere. You have to remember, 19th century Russia was buzzing with all these new radical ideas like nihilism and utilitarianism, which basically said, hey, maybe the old rules of God and morality, maybe they don't apply anymore. And you know, the detective in the novel, this incredibly clever guy named Porfiry, he reads Raskolnikov's article and just nails it. He boils the whole theory down to this: it's not about anarchy for everyone, it's about a select few having the right to break any law they want, simply because they're extraordinary. So basically, Raskolnikov puts everyone into two buckets. First, you've got the ordinary people, the herd. They're just here to obey the rules and, continue the species. They're the clay of history. But then you have the extraordinary people, the Napoleons, the geniuses. And these people, according to the theory, have an internal right to break the rules, to step over any obstacle, even if that obstacle is a person. And this is so important to understand. The murder wasn't really about the robbery or the money. Not at all. It was a test. He says it himself later on. I wanted to be a Napoleon. That's why I killed. He was desperate to prove to himself that he wasn't just another bug, another louse, as he calls it. He had to know if he was one of the special ones, one of the people who could actually do it. So, what happens when a perfectly constructed idea on paper collides with the blood and chaos of reality? Well, the second that axe falls, Raskolnikov's beautiful theory just starts to crumble, and his mind goes right along with it. He expected to feel powerful, right? Free, like a Napoleon surveying his battlefield. But he gets the exact opposite. The murder doesn't set him free. It throws him into a prison inside his own head. The crime, the collapse, the consequence, it's a straight line. The real punishment wasn't waiting for him at the police station. It started the moment the crime was done. Turns out, all that intellectual justification, it was completely useless against his own human nature. He's instantly swamped with this overwhelming guilt. He gets insanely paranoid, thinking everyone knows, everyone is staring at him. He gets physically sick, like high fevers, delirium, nightmares. It's Dostoevsky's way of screaming at us: you can build the most clever theory in the world, but you can't logic your way out of being human. And this is just the peak of the irony, right here. Raskolnikov himself, the guy whose whole plan was to rise above suffering, ends up saying this. He basically admits that to be truly great, you have to suffer. It's like his theory completely backfired. He tried to prove he was a Superman who felt nothing, but he ends up discovering that real greatness comes from feeling everything, especially the pain. Okay, so if Raskolnikov's whole reason is everything theory was such an epic fail, what's the answer? What's Dostoevsky's alternative? Well, it's not another clever theory. It's not an intellectual argument at all. It's a person. Her name is Sonya, and on the surface, she's the lowest of the low in society, forced into prostitution to feed her starving family, but spiritually, she's the absolute core of the book. She represents everything Raskolnikov isn't: faith, humility, and self-sacrifice. She's the perfect antidote to his intellectual arrogance. And this is her advice to him. It's so simple, but so powerful. She's not debating his theory. She's telling him, stop trying to think your way out of this hole you've dug. The only way out is to go through the suffering. Accept it, confess, be humbled. That's the only path back to being human. Dostoevsky isn't subtle about this either. There's a famous scene where Sonya actually reads the biblical story of Lazarus to Raskolnikov. You know, the story of the man Jesus brings back from the dead. The message is pretty clear, right? Raskolnikov is spiritually dead. His idea killed his soul, and the only way he can be resurrected is through faith. But hold on. If that was the whole story, it would be a pretty straightforward religious tale, wouldn't it? Good versus evil, faith versus reason. But Dostoevsky is way too clever for that. He introduces a new character who just throws a giant monkey wrench into the whole thing. A character who really complicates everything. This character, Svidrigailov, forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. What if the theory was right all along? What if the problem wasn't the idea itself, but the man? What if Raskolnikov was just too weak, too human, too full of guilt to pull it off? What if a real Superman came along? And that's Svidrigailov. He is Raskolnikov's theory made flesh. He's rich, he's corrupt, he's done horrible things. We're talking probable murder here, and he feels zero remorse, not a shred of guilt. He lives completely beyond good and evil. And what's the result? Is he a great, powerful Napoleon? No. He's just bored. Utterly, profoundly bored with everything. And if you want to know what his worldview leads to, just listen to this. It's one of the most chilling lines in literature. Someone asks him what he thinks eternity might be like. He doesn't imagine heaven or hell. He imagines this: a grubby little room with spiders, forever. That's the endpoint of his philosophy. Not fire and brimstone, but just endless, meaningless, dirty boredom. So this is where Dostoevsky leaves us. He puts Raskolnikov, and by extension all of us, at a crossroads. He shows us two possible escape routes from the dead end of nihilism. And the two paths could not be more different. You've got Sonya's way, the path of faith, of humility, of suffering that leads back to connection and redemption. And then you've got Svidrigailov's way, the path of pure ego, of nihilism, which ultimately leads to nothing but emptiness and, well, suicide. This is really Dostoevsky's final warning, his big takeaway. He's saying that these ideas, these purely rational me-first philosophies, they aren't just intellectual exercises. He saw them as a kind of spiritual poison. If you follow them to their logical conclusion, you don't get a world full of heroes. You get a world full of Svidrigailovs, a world of total despair. In the end, Raskolnikov chooses Sonya's path, but the book doesn't just wrap everything up neatly. It leaves us wrestling with that central conflict. It's the cold, hard logic of the intellect versus the messy, deep, and often illogical needs of the human spirit. And so the question it leaves for us is, in the battle for your own soul, which side wins? Reason or faith? Which one do you ultimately put your trust in?